Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching, so YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now, let's begin. I worked 3-week rotations as a cook on Beaufort drilling platform Delta 7 for about 8 months before this happened. I'm not someone who spooks easily. You don't last long in isolated postings if you are, but I need to tell someone about this because I haven't slept properly in 6 weeks. The platform housed 42 men during my shift. I knew exactly how much food we went through because inventory was my responsibility. Every Sunday I'd count everything: flour, sugar, rice, the frozen proteins, the individually wrapped butter blocks we kept in the walk-in. The company was strict about waste. If the numbers didn't match consumption logs, it came out of my bonus. 3rd week of February, I noticed the flour was low. Not dramatically, maybe 10 pounds under where it should have been. I chalked it up to measurement error and ordered extra for the next supply run. But when I opened a new 50-pound sack 2 days later, I found something that made me stand there in the dry storage room for a full minute, just staring. There were handprints pressed into the flour, small ones, maybe 3 inches from palm to fingertip, 5 distinct fingers on each, pressed deep enough that I could see the detail in what looked like, I don't know how else to say this, skin texture. Like someone had reached into the sack and squeezed, but the sack had been sealed. I'd opened it myself with a box cutter not 5 minutes earlier. I told myself it was a defect from the packaging facility. Maybe someone at the warehouse had contaminated it. I scooped out the top layer, double-bagged it, and threw it in the waste compactor. The butter was next. We stored it in 5-pound blocks, industrially wrapped in waxed paper and plastic. When I unwrapped one for the morning prep, I found grooves scraped along one side. Perfectly parallel lines, each about a ½ inch wide, running the length of the block. They were shallow, maybe 1/8 of an inch deep, but precise, deliberately precise. Something had scraped away thin layers of butter, and from the pattern, it had done so methodically, working from top to bottom. I checked the walk-in's temperature logs. Consistent. I checked the door seal. Fine. I asked the supply coordinator if we'd had any issues with the last shipment. He looked at me like I was wasting his time. That night, I started keeping a separate log. Not the official inventory sheet, a personal one. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if something was actually consuming our food in ways that didn't match human behavior. Over the next 4 days, I documented 8 pounds of rice taken from a container I'd personally locked. 2 blocks of cheese with the same grooved pattern as the butter. A case of vacuum-sealed crackers, each package opened with a clean slice along the seal, not torn, sliced, and exactly 12 crackers removed from each. More handprints in the flour, deeper this time, like whatever made them was pressing harder. The thing that got me, the thing that made my hands start shaking when I was alone in the kitchen at night, was the precision. This wasn't rats or spoilage or crew members sneaking food. Rats tear things apart. People are careless. This was careful, organized, systematic. I set up a test. I took a sealed bag of sugar and marked it with a Sharpie, 3 lines on each side forming a specific pattern I'd remember. I locked it in the storage room at 11 in the evening and checked it at 5 in the morning when I started breakfast prep. The bag was open, not torn. The seal was cut, perfectly straight, right along the factory seam. And inside, someone had taken exactly 2 cups of sugar. I know because I measured what was left. 2 cups, not approximately, exactly. I stopped sleeping well after that. The platform made constant noise, metal expanding and contracting, machinery running, the ocean hammering the legs, but I started hearing things underneath all that. Scraping sounds in the walls, soft impacts above the ceiling panels. Once, lying in my bunk around 2 a.m, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the galley directly above me. Light ones. Quick. I went up there with a flashlight. The galley was empty. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. But when I opened the walk-in, I found fresh grooves in another butter block. It was still cold. Whatever had done it had been there within the hour. I started talking to the crew carefully, not wanting to sound insane. Had anyone seen anything unusual? Heard anything? The rig supervisor said platforms always had weird acoustics. The night engineer said he'd been hearing scratching in the ductwork but figured it was ice buildup. One of the roughnecks mentioned his toolkit had been moved twice, tools rearranged in ways he didn't recognize. Look, I know how this sounds, but I need you to understand something. When you work on an isolated platform, you become hyper-aware of your environment. You know where everything is. You notice when things change, and things were changing in ways that followed a pattern. The consumption always happened between midnight and 4 a.m. It was always dry goods or fats, never fresh produce, never meat. The amounts were measured. The entry points were surgical, and the handprints kept appearing, each time slightly different in pressure and position, like whatever made them was adapting, learning how to leave less evidence. I installed a motion-activated camera in the dry storage room during my 4th week. Didn't tell anyone. Just a cheap hunting camera I'd brought from home, tucked behind a box of trash bags with a view of the flour and rice. Checked it after 3 nights. 96 hours of footage. I watched all of it on my laptop in my quarters, using headphones. For 95 hours and 40 minutes, nothing happened except me coming and going during normal prep times. Then at 2:47 in the morning on the 3rd night, the camera's motion sensor triggered. The footage showed the storage room door, which I'd locked, opening slowly. Not forced. Opened, like someone had a key. For 8 seconds, the doorway was empty. Just the dark corridor beyond and the emergency lighting casting that green-tinged glow. Then something moved across the frame, low to the ground, fast. The camera only caught it for maybe 2 seconds before it moved out of view, but I saw enough to know it wasn't human-shaped. The proportions were wrong, too long in the limbs. The movement was wrong too, fluid in a way that didn't match joints bending the way ours do. The camera recorded for another 6 minutes. I could hear sounds on the audio, paper rustling, something heavy being moved, a soft, repetitive noise like scraping. Then the same quick movement across the frame heading back toward the door and the door closing, or... I checked the storage room that morning. New grooves in the cheese. 4 pounds of flour gone from a bag I'd opened the day before. And on the camera itself, someone had placed a single cracker, perfectly centered on top of the lens, one of ours, from the case with the precise slice marks. I'm off the platform now. Finished my rotation 2 weeks ago and told the company I wouldn't be coming back. They didn't ask why. They never do. Turnover on isolated rigs is high. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I pulled the platform's maintenance records before I left, went back 5 years. Every cook who'd worked there longer than 3 months had reported inventory discrepancies. Every single one. And in the crew incident logs, there were 11 reports of people hearing movement in the walls, tools being rearranged, and food going missing from personal lockers. 11 reports over 5 years, all dismissed as human error or petty theft. The thing living in Delta 7 has been there for a long time. It knows the schedule, it knows where we keep the keys, and it's been learning how to take just enough that we'd notice, but not enough that we'd evacuate the platform and risk someone looking too carefully. I still have the camera footage. I've watched those 2 seconds maybe 100 times, trying to convince myself I'm seeing it wrong. But I'm not. And the thing that keeps me up now, the thing that makes me check my apartment's air vents before I can even try to sleep, is that on my last night on the platform, I found one more handprint. Not in flour this time. Pressed into the condensation on my quarters window from the inside, like something had been in there with me, touching the glass while I was asleep. I'm a school bus driver, have been for 16 years. I know that sounds weird for a 41-year-old guy, but the pay's decent and the benefits are solid. Most days I drive kids to school, standard routes, nothing special. But twice a month during winter, I get contracted out to the county maintenance department. They need someone with a commercial license to shuttle their crews between the small towns up in the highlands when the roads get bad. It's easy money. I've done it maybe 40, 50 times without incident. This happened in early February. There was a storm system that had been sitting over the region for almost a week, the kind that just keeps dumping snow with no break. The county needed to rotate crews at a remote pump station about 30 miles north of Bridgewater, and I got the call at 5 in the morning. 3 maintenance workers needed transport. I'd pick them up at the depot, drop them at the station, then bring the outgoing crew back. Simple run. I'm a pretty rational person for context. I don't do ghost tours or read horror novels. I listen to sports radio and worry about my mortgage like everyone else. The storm hit harder than the forecast predicted. By the time I left the depot with my 3 passengers, visibility was maybe 15 feet. The kind of snow where your headlights just hit a white wall and reflect back at you. I've driven in bad weather before. This was worse than usual, but manageable. The passengers were quiet, which was normal. Maintenance guys on early shifts don't tend to chat much. About 12 miles in, the road narrowed to a single lane with steep embankments on both sides. No other traffic. No lights except mine. Just that suffocating white void pressing in from every direction. I remember my hands were tight on the wheel, and I was leaning forward, trying to catch any glimpse of the road markers. That's when I glanced at my rearview mirror. School buses have these oversized mirrors. You can see the entire interior, all the rows of seats, straight back to the rear emergency exit. In the reflection, I saw 3 figures sitting in the back row, just silhouettes, really. Dark shapes against the pale vinyl of the seats. They were sitting perfectly still, side by side, facing forward. I'd put the workers in the front rows, always do. Easier to communicate, and they can get out faster when we arrive. I looked over my shoulder. The back rows were empty, completely empty. I looked back at the mirror. The 3 shapes were still there. I don't know why this detail matters, but it stuck with me. The figures in the mirror weren't moving at all. Not swaying with the motion of the bus, not shifting in their seats. Just frozen there like photographs. I checked over my shoulder again. Nothing. Back to the mirror, there they were. I did this maybe 4 or 5 times in the span of 30 seconds, and each time it was the same. The disconnect made my stomach drop in a way I can't really describe, like my brain was trying to reconcile 2 opposite realities at the same time. One of the workers up front asked if everything was okay. I told him I was fine, just checking my blind spots because of the snow. My voice sounded normal enough, but my hands had started sweating inside my gloves. I tried to focus on driving. Told myself it was some trick of the light, maybe condensation on the mirror creating shadows, something about the way the snow was reflecting. But I kept checking. I couldn't help it. And every single time I looked in that mirror, those 3 figures were sitting in the back row. Here's the thing. After about 5 minutes, I noticed they weren't in exactly the same positions anymore. Not moving exactly, but their postures had changed. One had its arms raised slightly. Another had turned its head just a degree or two. Small adjustments that I only noticed because I'd been staring at them so intensely. The road got worse. I had to slow down to maybe 10 miles per hour, and the silence in the bus became this oppressive thing. The workers had stopped talking entirely. The only sound was the engine and the scrape of the wipers fighting against the snow buildup. I checked the mirror again. The figure on the left had both hands out in front of it now. The middle one did too. And as I watched, God, even now telling this makes my hands shake. Their arms moved, slow, deliberate movements. They were gripping something invisible in front of them, turning their hands slightly left, then right. The motion was unmistakable. They were miming the act of steering a vehicle. I looked over my shoulder so fast I almost swerved off the road. The back of the bus was empty, just rows and rows of vacant seats disappearing into shadow. When I looked back at the mirror, all 3 figures had their hands raised now, all of them making the same steering motions in perfect synchronization. And then, for just a moment, maybe a second, maybe less, the figure in the middle turned its head and looked directly at my reflection. I couldn't see features. There was no face, just a darker concentration of shadow where a head should be. But I felt it looking at me. I don't remember making the decision to pull over, but suddenly I was braking and the bus was sliding slightly in the deep snow before coming to a stop. One of the workers asked what was wrong. I told him I needed to check something with the engine. I shut off the headlights, killed the interior lights, and sat there in the complete darkness with the engine running. I couldn't see anything. Not the road, not the inside of the bus, nothing. Just black and the faint sound of wind. I sat there for maybe 3 minutes before I turned the lights back on. The mirror showed an empty bus. All the seats were vacant, including the back row. The workers up front were staring at me with these concerned expressions, and one of them asked again if I was all right. I told them I was fine and got the bus moving again. For the rest of the drive to the pump station, another 18 miles, I didn't look at the rearview mirror once, not even a glance. I used the side mirrors for the road and kept my eyes forward. When we arrived and the workers got off, one of them mentioned that I seemed pretty shaken up and asked if I wanted him to report the road conditions as unsafe. I told him no, that I was just tired. The return trip with the outgoing crew was uneventful. Clear mirror, empty seats. By the time I got back to the depot, the snow had lightened up enough that I could see maybe 50 feet ahead. Everything felt normal again. I haven't been assigned to that route since. Different drivers have taken it. I've seen the schedule, and I haven't asked them about it because I don't know what I'd even say. Have you seen anything in your mirror? Do the empty seats ever look occupied? The thing that bothers me most isn't what I saw. It's that I have no explanation for why it only happened during that specific stretch of road in that specific weather, and why the figures were mimicking me. Like they were showing me that they could do what I was doing. Or maybe that they were doing it instead of me and I just didn't realize it. I'm a lumberjack, self-employed, which means I scout my own cuts. That morning I hiked into a section of temperate rainforest I'd marked on a previous trip. Dense Sitka spruce, western hemlock, the kind of old growth that makes your equipment feel small. The fog was thick, the kind that hangs in sheets between the trees and muffles everything. I've worked in fog before. This felt different, heavier, but I didn't think much of it. I had my compass, my GPS unit, my flagging tape, standard kit. I marked my entry point with bright orange tape on a hemlock and started walking a straight line northeast, checking for viable timber. The ground was soft with centuries of moss and decomposed needles. Every step sank a little. The silence was the first thing that got to me. Not peaceful silence, but the kind where you realize you haven't heard a bird or a squirrel in over an hour. About 2 hours in, I came across a fallen log. Massive thing, maybe 4 feet in diameter, covered in a thick pelt of bright green moss. It had a distinctive shape. One end split into 3 prongs like a trident where the roots had torn free. I stepped over it and kept moving northeast. Compass said I was on course. 30 minutes later, I saw the log again. Same 3-pronged root system, same moss pattern. I remembered a bald patch on the left side where something had scraped the surface clean. I stopped and checked my compass, still pointing northeast. I looked behind me. I could see my own boot prints in the soft ground, leading back in a straight line. I looked ahead. More of my boot prints leading away from the log in the same direction. I told myself I'd gotten turned around somehow. Fog can do that. I pulled out my GPS unit. It showed I'd traveled 1.3 miles from my entry point, still moving northeast. No curves in my path. A straight line on the digital map. I stepped over the log again and kept walking. This time I counted my steps. At 500 paces, I stopped and looked back. I could barely see the log through the fog, maybe 60 yards behind me. I turned and continued northeast. At 1,000 paces, I found the log directly in front of me again. My hands started shaking then. I checked the GPS. It said I'd traveled another 0.4 miles northeast, but I was standing at the same log, looking at the same 3-pronged root system, the same bald patch of exposed wood on the left side. I bent down and touched the moss. It was cold and damp, real as anything I'd ever touched. I looked at my boot prints. They were everywhere now, a chaotic web of tracks that seemed to approach the log from every direction. Yet my compass had never wavered. Every path showed me walking in a straight line, but all the lines led here. I tried walking west. I counted 200 paces, marked a tree with my knife, a deep X carved into the bark. Then I turned and walked east, away from the mark. At 400 paces, I found the marked tree directly in front of me. The X was fresh, sap still beating in the cuts, but I'd walked away from it. The compass confirmed I'd walked east the entire time. That's when I heard my own voice. It was faint, muffled by the fog, but unmistakable. I was calling out coordinates to myself, the same numbers I'd radioed to my partner that morning before heading in. The voice was coming from somewhere ahead of me, northeast, maybe 100 yards out. I stood there listening to myself repeat the coordinates, then go silent. A few seconds later, I heard boots crunching through the undergrowth, moving away. I didn't call out. Something in me knew I shouldn't. I started walking toward where the voice had come from. The fog seemed to thicken as I moved, pressing in close enough that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I found more of my boot prints, but these were different. The tread was fresher, the edges of the depressions sharper, less collapsed. I knelt down and looked at them closely. These prints had been made minutes ago, maybe seconds. I was still kneeling when I saw the print appear. It materialized in the soft ground directly in front of me. 1 second, there was undisturbed moss. The next, there was a boot print, my boot print, same tread pattern, same size. I watched the moss compress in real time as if an invisible foot had just stepped down. Then another print appeared, a pace ahead. Then another. I couldn't move. I watched a trail of my own footprints walk themselves into existence, passing within 3 feet of where I crouched. They led back toward the log. I don't know how long I stayed frozen there, watching the ground, waiting to see if anything else would happen. My breathing had gone shallow and rapid. The GPS unit in my hand showed I was now 2.1 miles from my entry point, still in a straight line northeast. When I finally stood up, my legs were numb from kneeling. I turned in a slow circle, trying to orient myself, trying to find any landmark that wasn't the log. Everything looked the same. Spruce, hemlock, fog, moss. The silence was absolute now. No wind, no birds, nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Decided to try something different. I took out my roll of flagging tape and started tying pieces to trees as I walked, creating a visible trail. Bright orange strips every 10 feet. I walked northeast again, moving slowly, watching the trees ahead and behind me. After 100 feet, I looked back. The flagging tape was there, marking my path clearly. At 200 feet, I looked back again. The tape was gone, all of it. Every tree I'd marked showed bare bark, no sign that anything had ever been tied there. But when I walked back to check, I found the tape, lying on the ground in neat strips, as if someone had carefully untied each piece and placed it in the moss. I haven't told you the worst part yet. When I finally made it out, and I don't know how I managed that, I just kept walking until the trees started to thin and I could hear the road. I checked the timestamp on my GPS. I'd entered the forest at 7:15 in the morning. The GPS said I'd exited at 7:53, 38 minutes, but my watch said it was 6:20 in the evening. 11 hours had passed. My phone confirmed it. The light confirmed it. It was nearly dusk. I drove home and didn't tell anyone what happened. Took a week off work, said I was sick. Last week, I got a call from the Forestry Service. They'd found my orange flagging tape deep in that section of forest about 4 miles in. They wanted to know why I'd marked trees in a perfect circle, 30 feet in diameter, with the 3-pronged log at the exact center. I didn't go back. I won't go back. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can feel it. That same heaviness in the air. That same quality of silence. And I think about those boot prints appearing in the moss, walking themselves into existence just a few feet away from where I knelt. I think about what would have happened if I'd stood up a few seconds earlier, if I'd stepped into the path of those invisible footprints. My name is Aaron Blake. I'm 40 years old, and for the last 8 years I've worked air traffic control at Kivak Regional Airport, about 200 miles south of the Arctic Circle. It's not a big operation, maybe 6 flights a day in summer, 3 in winter. Most nights, especially during the dark months, I'm alone in the tower with nothing but coffee and paperwork. I'm a rational person. I follow procedures. I don't believe in ghost stories. February 11th was supposed to be a quiet shift. A blizzard had moved in around 6 in the evening. Visibility down to maybe 50 feet, winds gusting to 40 knots. We'd already diverted the last scheduled arrival to Fairbanks. The radar screen showed nothing but ground clutter and weather returns. I'd settled in with my thermos, ready to monitor conditions and file reports every hour until my relief showed up at 6 in the morning. Around 11:30, a contact appeared on my screen. Not a weather anomaly. A solid return, about 40 miles out, heading straight for the airport at maybe 200 knots. I stared at it for a good 10 seconds before I radioed. Unidentified aircraft, this is Kivak Tower. You are entering controlled airspace. Identify yourself. The response came through so clear it could have been someone in the room with me. Kivak Tower, this is North Star 47 Heavy, requesting landing clearance for runway 23. The voice was calm, professional. exactly how a pilot should sound. But I had no flight plan for any North Star aircraft. I pulled up the registry. North Star Aviation had been a cargo operation out of Alaska. Past tense. They dissolved in 1983. I keyed the mic. North Star 47 Heavy. I show no filed flight plan. What is your point of origin? Point of origin is Anchorage, Kivak Tower. Estimate arrival in 35 minutes. Souls on board, 3. Fuel sufficient, standard reporting, everything by the book, but something in my chest had gone cold. I checked the radar again. The contact was still there, still tracking inbound. Altitude showing as 8,000 feet, descending. I looked out the tower windows. Nothing but white. The snow was coming down so thick I couldn't see the runway lights. North Star 47 Heavy, be advised current conditions are below minimums. Visibility less than 1/8 mile, winds gusting to 40. I cannot authorize landing at this time. There was a pause, maybe 3 seconds. When the voice came back, it had the same measured calm. Kivak Tower, we are committed to this approach. Fuel state is critical. Request immediate clearance. I should have refused. I should have told them to divert. But here's the thing. I could hear something in that pilot's voice that wasn't panic exactly, but a kind of finality. Like he was telling me what was going to happen, not asking permission. North Star 47 Heavy, cleared to land runway 23. Winds 240 at 35, gusting to 40. Report on final. Cleared to land, runway 23, North Star 47 Heavy. I sat there watching that contact creep closer. 20 miles. 15. My hand was shaking enough that I had to put down my coffee. The rational part of my brain kept trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a smuggler using an old call sign, or someone flying off the books, or a malfunction in the radar. But I knew what I was seeing was impossible because nothing could fly in these conditions, and nothing that size should be landing at our runway anyway. At 10 miles, I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind, a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But it grew, deep and mechanical, like massive turbines spooling up. I went to the window and pressed my face against the glass, trying to see anything through the snow. The sound kept building, not just loud. I could feel it in my sternum, vibrating up through the floor of the tower. North Star 47. Heavy, report altitude, 3,000 feet, on approach. The sound was directly overhead now. Not the clean whine of a modern jet engine, but something older, heavier, the kind of deep thunder you'd hear from old radial engines or early turboprops. The tower was shaking. My coffee cup rattled across the desk. I grabbed the binoculars and scanned the approach path, but there was nothing. Just that howling white emptiness and the sound of something huge descending through it. North Star 47. Heavy, I do not have you in sight. Confirm you are on glide path. On glide path, Kivak Tower. Breaking out now. The engines were so loud I thought the windows would shatter. I could hear individual components. The whistle of compressed air, the rumble of combustion, the mechanical scream of something massive forcing itself through the storm. The tower lights flickered. My radio hissed with static. And I stood there with the binoculars pressed so hard against my face they hurt, scanning desperately for any sign of lights or a fuselage or anything. Nothing. Just wind and snow and that impossible sound. North Star 47. Heavy, wave off. I repeat, wave off. You are not aligned with the runway. The pilot's response came through perfectly clear, no static, no distortion. Negative Kivak Tower. We have the field in sight. The sound peaked. For maybe 5 seconds, the entire tower shook like something massive was passing directly above it, so low I could have reached up and touched it if the roof wasn't there. The lights went out completely. In the dark, I could hear things sliding off my desk, the weather station alarm going off, my own breathing coming too fast. Then silence. Not gradually, just gone. Like someone had flipped a switch. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in red. I looked at the radar screen. Empty. No contact. Not even the ground clutter from before, just a clean sweep. I grabbed the radio with both hands to keep them steady. North Star 47 Heavy, Kivak Tower. Do you read? Static. North Star 47 Heavy, this is Kivak Tower. Radio check. More static. Then, cutting through it, that same calm voice. Kivak Tower, North Star 47 Heavy is down and secured. Thank you for the clearance. The radio went dead. I stood there for I don't know how long before I could make my legs work. When I got down to ground level, I took one of the service vehicles and drove out to runway 23, following the lights through the snow. The wind had died down to almost nothing. It was so quiet I could hear my boots crunching in the fresh powder. The runway was empty. No tracks, no disturbed snow, no heat signature on the pavement. I drove the full length of it twice, then checked the taxiways and the apron. Nothing. When my relief arrived at 6, I didn't mention it. I filed my weather reports, logged the diverted flight from earlier, and went home. I told myself I'd imagined it. Fatigue, isolation, the stress of working alone in the winter dark. But here's what I can't explain, and why I'm telling you this now. 2 weeks ago, I was going through old logbooks in the basement storage. We're required to keep them for 25 years before disposal. I found the book from February 1983, February 11th, 1983, to be specific. Night shift controller was a guy named Robert Parrish. His last entry, logged at 11:47 in the evening, reads, North Star 47. Heavy cleared to land runway 23. No visual contact established. Aircraft did not arrive. There's a notation in the margin added later in different handwriting. Parrish resigned effective immediately. No explanation provided. I'm a freelance geologist, mostly contract work for mining outfits and land surveyors. 32 years old. Been doing this for about 8 years now. I'm used to being alone in the field for weeks at a time. That's never bothered me. I'm a pretty rational person for context. I deal in rock strata and mineral composition, not ghost stories. Last September, I got hired by a prospecting firm to survey some old mining claims up in the Wrangell Mountains, maybe 60 miles from the nearest logging road. There used to be a gold camp up there in the 1890s, Vance Creek, which is actually where my family name comes from, though I didn't know that until I took the job. The camp was abandoned around 1897. The firm wanted to know if there was any viable ore left before they invested in access roads and equipment. The hike-in took me 2 days. When I reached the site, it was more intact than I expected. 3 log structures still standing, though the roofs had mostly caved in. Rusted equipment half buried in the undergrowth, and the mine entrance itself, which was my primary target for the survey, except I couldn't find it at first. The historical records placed it on the north face of a specific ridge, and I had GPS coordinates that should have been accurate to within 10 feet. But when I got there, all I found was a slope of loose scree and dirt that looked wrong, too uniform. I started digging with my folding spade, and about 18 inches down I hit concrete. Not wooden supports, not collapsed rock. Concrete. Modern concrete, or at least nothing from the 1890s. I spent the better part of a day excavating enough to understand what I was looking at. Someone had sealed the mine entrance with a concrete plug, at least 4 feet thick, then backfilled the whole area to hide it. The concrete was old. Cracks and weathering suggested maybe 1950s or 60s, but the work was deliberate, professional. And here's the thing that bothered me even then. The equipment needed to mix and pour that much concrete would have been hell to get up there. This wasn't some casual closure. Someone wanted that mine shut permanently and forgotten. I documented it, took samples, and set up my base camp about 200 yards downslope near a creek. Standard procedure for me. Tent, survey equipment, field radio that mostly didn't work up there, and about 3 weeks of supplies. The first week was normal. I mapped the area, took soil samples, checked for surface mineralization. I'd leave my geological hammer on a rock when I stopped for lunch, mark my position, move on. Routine stuff. On the 8th day, I found my hammer a quarter mile from where I'd left it. I noticed it was missing around noon and figured I'd just misremembered where I'd set it down. Spent 20 minutes backtracking before I spotted it resting on a flat boulder way off my survey route. The thing is, I mark all my tools with bright red electrical tape on the handles for exactly this reason, so I can spot them if I drop one in brush or scree. This was definitely mine. Same wrap pattern. I convinced myself I'd had it with me earlier in the morning and forgotten. Fatigue, maybe. The altitude. 2 days later, I left my GPS unit on a stump while I took photographs of an outcropping. When I came back maybe 10 minutes later, it was gone. I found it that evening sitting in the middle of the trail leading back to camp, a trail I'd already walked twice that day. Look, I'm not an idiot. I know when something's off. But the alternative, that something was moving my equipment, seemed more absurd than just accepting I was getting careless. Then I found the first diary. It was inside one of the collapsed cabins, tucked into a rotted leather satchel. The pages were brittle, but I could make out most of it. A guy named Howell, one of the miners from the original camp. The entries started normal. Work logs, ore yields, weather complaints. Then, about 6 months before the camp was abandoned, the tone shifted. Howell wrote about tools going missing. Pickaxes found miles from the dig site. Blasting powder moved from the storage shed to the mine entrance overnight. He blamed other miners at first, accused them of sabotage, but then he started writing about hearing footsteps in the tunnels that didn't match any of the crew's gates, about finding boot prints in the mine that were too small and pressed too deep, like something heavy was walking on tiptoe. The final entry just said, "It wants us gone. It keeps showing us it can reach anything." I should have left then. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just pack up and hike out? Here's why. I'd signed a contract, and I needed the money. Also, some part of me still thought there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe someone else was up there, squatters, another surveyor. Maybe I was getting carbon monoxide poisoning from my camp stove, hallucinating the whole thing. I checked the stove. It was fine. On day 12, I woke up to find every single one of my survey stakes pulled out of the ground and arranged in a circle around my tent. 23 stakes, each one placed exactly 2 feet from the tent wall. I hadn't heard a thing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my field radio. I tried calling for an early extraction, but the signal kept breaking up, just static and a weird rhythmic clicking underneath. That afternoon, I found my hammer again. This time it was resting on top of the concrete seal over the mine entrance. I hadn't been back there since that first day. I didn't retrieve it. I left it there and went back to camp to start packing. But my tent was already packed when I got there. Every piece of equipment neatly disassembled and stacked beside the tent, which had been folded into a perfect square. My sleeping bag rolled tight with the straps fastened. It would have taken me an hour to pack that carefully. I'd been gone maybe 20 minutes. I heard something then, a sound like boot falls on loose rock coming from upslope, slow, deliberate steps, not trying to be quiet. I turned and there was nothing there, just trees and scree and the empty outline of those ruined cabins against the sky. The steps kept coming, closer. I still couldn't see anything, but I could hear the rocks shifting under weight, could hear the rhythm of it, and God, even now telling this, makes my hands shake. It was the same cadence I walk with, the exact same pattern. I didn't pack. I just ran. It took me a day and a half to hike out, and I didn't stop except to catch my breath. When I reached my truck and looked back up the valley, I swear I could see something standing at the tree line. Too far to make out details. Just a dark shape, completely still, watching me leave. I told the firm I couldn't complete the survey. Equipment failure, bad weather. I don't even remember what excuse I used. They weren't happy, but they paid me for the partial work. I never went back for the rest of my gear. Last week, a package showed up at my apartment. No return address. Inside was my geological hammer, the one I'd left on the concrete seal. The red tape was still wrapped around the handle. I live in Anchorage now, 400 miles from those mountains. I don't know how it got here. I'm a commercial truck driver, have been for 15 years. I haul freight up the Dalton Highway in Alaska, which is about as monotonous as driving gets. 500 miles of permafrost, minimal traffic, and the kind of emptiness that makes you understand why people lose their minds in isolation. But I'm a rational guy. I've done this route maybe 200 times. I know every mile marker, every fuel stop, every stretch where the wind hits hardest. Nothing surprises me up there anymore, or it didn't until 3 weeks ago. I was about 4 hours into an overnight run somewhere past Coldfoot. It was February, so I'm talking full dark at 4 in the afternoon, temperature around -30, the kind of cold that makes your truck groan. I had my headlights cutting through this wall of black, heater-blasting thermos of coffee wedged between my thighs. Standard night. Then I saw it. A piece of cardboard, maybe 8 by 10 inches, taped to the safety railing on the right side of the road, just outside my passenger window. It was maybe 50 feet ahead when my headlights caught it, and I only noticed because it was the only thing out there that wasn't snow or reflective road markers. Non-reflective. Flat brown cardboard with something written on it in black marker. I slowed down, not much, but enough to read it as I passed. It said, "You should have kept the $4,200 in your savings account instead of moving it to checking last Thursday. The transmission job can wait." I need you to understand something. That's not generic advice. That's not horoscope garbage. 4 days before this trip, I transferred $4,200 from my savings to checking because my truck's transmission was slipping, and I'd gotten a quote for repairs. I hadn't told anyone. Not my ex-wife, not my dispatcher, not my buddy who I sometimes grab beers with. I did it online, alone, at 11 at night in my apartment. I hit the brakes harder than I should have on ice. The truck fishtailed slightly before I got it under control and pulled over. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, hands locked on the wheel trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Then I threw it in park, grabbed my flashlight, and walked back. The cardboard was still there, taped to the railing with duct tape, flapping slightly in the wind. I tore it off, shined my light on it to make sure I'd read it right, I had. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Someone had taken time with this. I looked around, just reflex, I guess. There was nothing. No cars, no structures, no footprints in the snow on the shoulder, though that didn't mean much with the wind. I folded the cardboard, shoved it in my jacket pocket, and got back in the cab. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? And say what? Someone left me financial advice on a piece of cardboard? I sat there for 5 minutes, engine idling, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe someone hacked my bank account, saw the transfer, and wanted to mess with me, but that didn't explain how they knew I'd be on this specific stretch of highway at this specific time. I don't run a set schedule. Loads come in, I take them. The timing's always different. I convinced myself it was a coincidence, some weird prank that just happened to line up with my life. I pulled back onto the highway and kept driving. An hour later, I saw another one. Same setup, brown cardboard, duct tape to the railing, passenger side. This time I saw it from farther away because I was looking for it. I slowed down earlier, read it as I approached. It said, "You still think about the man you hit in Fairbanks in 2019. You never reported it because you were 3 drinks in and scared. He was fine, but you don't know that for sure." I stopped breathing. That accident, it wasn't even an accident, really. I'd clipped a guy in a crosswalk at maybe 5 miles an hour, barely a tap. He'd waved me off, kept walking. But yeah, I'd had a few beers earlier that night, and I panicked and drove away. I've never told anyone, not a single person. It's the thing I feel worst about in my entire life, and I think about it maybe once a week, usually right before I fall asleep. I didn't stop this time. I kept driving, doing maybe 40 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone, hands welded to the wheel. My chest felt tight. I couldn't get a full breath like the air in the cab had thinned out. 20 minutes later, another one. "Your daughter's birthday is March 9th. You haven't called her in 7 months." I started crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down my face, because that one was true too, and it's the thing that keeps me up at night more than anything else. My daughter's 16 now. We haven't spoken since last summer after a bad fight about missed child support payments. I've picked up the phone a dozen times to call her and always put it back down. I need to be clear about something. These signs weren't random. They weren't visible until I got close. No one was driving ahead of me. I'd have seen headlights. No one was behind me. The highway was empty. But every 30 minutes to an hour, there'd be another one, perfectly placed where I'd see it, perfectly timed to when I'd arrive. The fourth one said, "You should check your rearview mirror more often." I did. There was nothing there. The fifth one about 2 hours later. "The truck stop in Dead Horse has a payphone. You should use it to call your daughter when you arrive. Don't wait." By then I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I thought about turning around, but I was closer to Dead Horse than to anywhere else, and the idea of driving back past those signs made my stomach turn. I kept going, kept watching for the next one. The sixth one appeared just after midnight. "We'll stop now. You've been sufficiently motivated." That was it. No more signs after that. I drove the last 90 miles in complete silence. I'd turned off the radio hours ago because I couldn't stand any noise. When I got to the truck stop in Dead Horse, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could move. I used the payphone. My daughter answered. We talked for 40 minutes. It went better than I expected. I reported the transmission issue when I got home. The mechanic said it could wait another few months if I drove carefully. I moved the money back to savings. I'm supposed to make another Dalton run next week. I don't know if I can do it. Need to tell someone about what happened in Alaska last winter. because I keep second-guessing myself, and maybe saying it out loud will help me figure out if I'm losing it or if something actually happened out there. I'm a field biologist, 26 years old, master's degree, pretty straightforward career doing wildlife surveys for conservation groups. Not the type who gets spooked easily. I've spent weeks alone in remote locations, dealt with aggressive moose, had a black bear tear through my camp once. I know wilderness. I know animal behavior. That's what makes this so hard to explain. The assignment was a winter predator survey in the interior, about 40 miles from the nearest settlement. 3 weeks solo, documenting lynx and wolverine populations through track surveys and camera traps. Standard protocol included setting steel-jawed leg traps, 12 of them, positioned along known game trails. Not to harm anything, just to get population data. The traps were heavy-duty, required significant force to set, and I marked each location with GPS coordinates and flagging tape. I set all 12 traps on a Monday afternoon, checked my notes twice, made sure each one was properly anchored and disguised. Fresh snow started falling around 7 that evening, big, heavy flakes that would cover everything by morning. I remember being glad for it, actually. Fresh snow meant fresh tracks, clean data. I headed out at first light to check the trap line. The snowfall had stopped around midnight, leaving maybe 4 inches of powder, completely undisturbed. And here's where things got strange. Every single trap had been sprung, all 12. But they were empty. No animals, no blood, no fur, nothing. That alone wasn't impossible. Sometimes animals escape, though it's rare with properly set traps. But there were no drag marks, no signs of struggle, no disturbance in the snow around any of the traps except for my own approaching footprints. I stood there at the first site for probably 10 minutes just staring. The trap had been triggered, then carefully reset. Not perfectly, but close enough that I knew immediately someone had done it deliberately. The chain was arranged differently than I'd left it. The padding I'd used for camouflage had been moved. I checked the second trap. Same thing. Sprung, reset, no tracks except mine. The third, the fourth. All 12 were identical, and the snow around each site was pristine. No boot prints, no animal tracks, nothing. Just smooth, unbroken white extending in every direction. I know what you're thinking, because I thought it too. Maybe I'd miscounted the snowfall timing. Maybe the snow fell after someone tampered with them. But I checked the weather data on my satellite communicator that morning. Snow had stopped at 11:47. I'd noted it specifically because I was tracking precipitation for the report. Nothing had fallen between midnight and dawn. I spent 2 hours examining every site, taking photos, looking for any explanation. There was none. Someone or something had accessed all 12 traps, sprung them, reset them, and left no trace in fresh snow. The traps were spread across nearly 3 miles of terrain, rugged, dense forest with steep ravines. Even if someone had deliberately targeted them, doing it without leaving tracks was impossible. I radioed the situation to my supervisor that afternoon. He suggested equipment malfunction, maybe temperature-related spring tension issues. Possible, but it didn't explain the resetting. I didn't mention the no footprints detail. It sounded insane, even in my own head. That night I locked everything. My supply cache was a bear-proof steel container with a 4-digit combination lock. 9273, my sister's birthday. I checked it twice before bed, tested the lock, made sure the seal was tight. The cache contained 3 weeks of food, medical supplies, batteries, emergency gear, everything I needed to survive out there. I didn't sleep well. Kept thinking about those traps, running through possibilities that made sense. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something outside. Not close, maybe 50 yards away. branches snapping, but in a rhythm that seemed wrong, too deliberate, too measured. I stayed in my sleeping bag, headlamp off, listening until the sound stopped around dawn. Morning came gray and cold. I went to the cache to get breakfast supplies. The combination lock was open, not broken, not cut. Open, hanging loose on the hasp. The container itself was closed but not sealed. I opened it slowly, expecting everything to be gone. But nothing was missing except one thing: a single wool sock. Not a pair, just the left sock from my backup set. Still clean, still folded how I'd packed it. Everything else was untouched. Food, medical kit, batteries, all there, just the sock. Here's the thing that made my hands start shaking. I don't know why this detail matters, but it stuck with me. The sock was from the bottom of my clothing stuff sack, buried under 2 layers of thermal underwear and 3 other pairs of socks. Someone had opened the cache, opened the stuff sack, dug through the contents, selected one specific sock, then repacked everything else exactly as it had been. The combination lock had been opened, not forced. The 4-digit code that only I knew. I checked the perimeter. Fresh snow from overnight, maybe 2 inches. No footprints anywhere near the cache except mine from the previous evening. The nearest tracks were mine from earlier in the week, already half filled with snow. Nothing else. No boot prints, no drag marks, no disturbance. Just my own trail leading to and from the container. I stood there in the cold, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd opened it myself and forgotten. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking. But I knew the lock had been closed when I checked it before bed. Knew with absolute certainty. And I don't sleepwalk, never have. The next 2 nights were worse. I started hearing those deliberate footsteps circling my camp, always staying just beyond my light range. I'd sweep my headlamp toward the sound and it would stop. Wait 30 seconds. Resume from a different direction, sometimes closer, never close enough to see anything. On the 4th night, I stayed awake entirely, sitting with my back to a tree, headlamp on, listening. Around 2 in the morning, the footsteps stopped about 20 feet away. I could hear breathing, not heavy, just slow, measured breaths, human sounding. I called out, asked who was there, said I was armed even though I only had a folding knife. No response. Just breathing. Then nothing. Silence so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. When dawn came, I checked that area. No tracks. No tracks anywhere except my own panicked circles from earlier in the night. The snow was perfect, undisturbed, mocking me. I called for early extraction that morning. Told my supervisor I had equipment failure, couldn't complete the survey. He was annoyed but arranged a pickup for the following day. I spent that final day packing, staying in open ground, avoiding the tree line. That last night I didn't sleep. Sat in my tent with everything packed, ready to move if needed. The footsteps came back around midnight, but this time they stopped right outside my tent. I could see the fabric moving slightly, like someone was standing inches away, examining it. Not touching, just standing there. I held my knife, didn't breathe, waited. After maybe 5 minutes, I heard my own voice outside the tent. Not similar. Identical. My voice saying my own name. Edwin. Just once. Then silence. The plane picked me up at noon. I didn't mention what happened, just said the survey was compromised by equipment issues. When I got back to Anchorage, I checked my gear. The missing sock was in my duffel bag, clean and folded, placed on top of everything else. I hadn't packed it there. I know I hadn't. I don't work winter surveys anymore. Can't. Every time I see fresh snow, I think about those perfect empty fields around the traps, around the cache, around my tent. No footprints, no explanation. Just something that knew exactly where I'd be and what would frighten me most. Not violence, not danger, but the quiet certainty that something had been watching, learning, and getting closer the entire time. I work in IT consulting, mostly remote, and when I took the Anchorage contract last November, I knew what I was signing up for. Cold, dark winters. I didn't think it would matter much. I'd be inside working anyway. The apartment building was one of those modern complexes with good insulation and shared hallways that smelled like cleaning products and someone's perpetual crock-pot dinner. My neighbors were the usual mix. Quiet, polite in the elevator, the kind of people who nod and keep walking. That suited me fine. I'm not antisocial, but after Zoom calls all day, I didn't need much human contact. The darkness hit harder than I expected. By mid-December, the sun was barely making an appearance. Just this weak orange glow on the horizon for a few hours before it gave up entirely. I started sleeping weird hours, losing track of time. My apartment felt like a submarine, sealed off from anything resembling a normal day-night cycle. I stopped going out unless I had to. Groceries got delivered. Work was on my laptop. The world outside my door became theoretical. That's when my neighbors started noticing. It began with Margaret from 3B. She knocked one evening, or what I thought was evening, it was hard to tell. She was holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "I made too much," she said, smiling in that tight way people do when they're being polite but also won't take no for an answer. "You should eat something hot." I thanked her, took the dish, figured that was the end of it. But 2 hours later, she texted me. I didn't even know she had my number. Must have gotten it from the building directory. "Did you eat? Just checking." The next day, David from across the hall stopped me as I was taking out trash. "Hey, Ramon, you doing okay? Haven't seen you around much?" "Yeah, just busy with work." He nodded slowly, like he was processing something important. "It's the darkness, man. Gets to everyone. You gotta fight it. Stay social, you know? Keep your routines." I appreciated the concern, I guess, but it felt invasive coming from someone I'd maybe exchanged 10 words with in 2 months. Then it escalated. Margaret started knocking every morning at 9, not to drop off food this time, just to check in. "Making sure you're up," she'd say through the door if I didn't answer fast enough. When I told her I was fine and didn't need daily wellness checks, she looked genuinely distressed. "Ramon, we can't let people slip through the cracks. Not in winter, not here." David began texting me every few hours. "You home? Just checking in. Let me know you're good." I tried ignoring them. That made it worse. One night I decided to go for a walk. Just to get out, clear my head, feel like I still had autonomy over my own life. I made it maybe 2 blocks before my phone started blowing up. Margaret, David, someone named Patricia from the 2nd floor I'd never even spoken to. "Where are you? Are you safe? Come back, we're worried." When I got back to the building, there were 4 of them waiting in the lobby. Margaret, David, Patricia, and an older guy named Harold, who I'd only seen checking his mailbox. They looked relieved and annoyed in equal measure. "You can't just leave without telling someone," Margaret said. "I'm 30 years old. I don't need permission to take a walk." "It's not about permission," David said, and his voice had this edge I hadn't heard before. "It's about community, about keeping each other safe." "Safe from what?" "The cold, the dark." "I'm fine." Harold stepped forward. He was a big guy, not threatening exactly, but imposing. "You're not fine. None of us are fine. That's the point. We hold each other up. We don't let anyone disappear into their apartment and stop existing." The way he said disappear made my skin prickle. They insisted I come to dinner in the community room that night. Not asked. Insisted. When I said I had work to finish, Margaret's face did this thing where the smile stayed, but her eyes went flat. Work can wait. This can't. Look, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just tell them to back off, maybe talk to the building manager? Here's the thing. They weren't being overtly aggressive. They were being concerned, caring. And there was this unspoken understanding that if I pushed back too hard, I'd be the jerk, the ungrateful neighbor who rejected the community's help during the hardest season. The dinner was in the building's common area, a room I'd walked past 100 times but never entered. There were maybe 15 people there, way more than I'd realized lived in the building. They'd made a whole spread: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, bread. Someone had put up string lights to make it feel festive. Everyone was aggressively cheerful. They asked about my work, my family, my hobbies, barely waiting for answers before someone else jumped in with another question. The conversation felt performative, like they were following a script titled How to Keep Ramon Engaged. Every time I tried to excuse myself, someone would gently redirect me back to my seat. Stay for dessert. We haven't done the group photo yet. Just a few more minutes. I finally left around 11. My face hurt from forcing smiles. The next morning, Margaret knocked at 7. We're doing daily check-ins now, she announced. Everyone participates. It's for the collective good. Margaret, I appreciate what you're all trying to do, but I need space. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. Space is what the darkness wants you to have, Ramon. Space turns into isolation. Isolation turns into... She trailed off, but her expression finished the sentence. That afternoon, I found a printed schedule slipped under my door. Winter Wellness Community Program. It had my name on it. Mandatory group dinners 3 times a week. Daily morning check-ins. Assigned buddy for evening texts. Patricia, apparently. Weekend activities. Movie nights, game tournaments, group walks. I crumpled it up and threw it away. The knocking didn't stop. The texts didn't stop. When I stopped answering my door, they got the building manager involved. He showed up with David, explaining that the community was concerned about my mental health and that isolation was a documented risk factor for seasonal depression. He strongly suggested I participate in the wellness program for my own good. I started keeping my apartment dark, pretending I wasn't home. But they knew. They always knew. I'd hear them in the hallway outside my door, talking in low voices. He's in there. He's not answering. We need to be more proactive. One evening I heard them discussing a key. Margaret had apparently talked to the manager about wellness checks requiring entry access in case of emergency. If he won't let us help him, we have to help him anyway. That's when I realized they weren't going to stop. This wasn't concern anymore, if it ever was. This was control dressed up as care. They decided I needed to be saved from myself, and they were going to save me whether I wanted it or not. I packed a bag that night, quiet, in the dark, with my phone off. I was going to leave, find a hotel, maybe cut the contract short, and go back to Seattle. I opened my door at 3 a.m. The hallway should have been empty. Harold was sitting in a chair outside my apartment, just sitting there, awake, like he'd been waiting. Going somewhere? He asked. My mouth went dry. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get some air. At 3 a.m, in winter, in Anchorage. He stood up slowly. That's exactly the kind of decision we're here to prevent, Ramon. I heard other doors opening. Margaret, David, Patricia, others I didn't recognize. They stepped into the hallway like they'd been positioned there all along, waiting for this exact moment. "We're not letting you hurt yourself," Margaret said, and she sounded genuinely compassionate, which somehow made it worse. I'm back in my apartment now. They didn't force me. They didn't have to. They just stood there blocking the elevator, the stairs, every exit, explaining calmly that leaving in the middle of the night during a depressive episode wasn't safe, that they'd made a commitment to each other and to me, that community means no one gets left behind. The schedule is still on my counter. I can hear them in the hallway, their voices soft and constant, like a heartbeat I can't escape. There's a group dinner tonight. Margaret texted to remind me. Patricia will check in at 8. The sun came up for about 2 hours today. I watched it from my window, that weak orange glow, and tried to remember what it felt like to choose when I could leave my own home. I'm not someone who spooks easily. 20 years in the Coast Guard will do that to you. You see enough real emergencies that ghost stories start feeling pretty hollow. But I need to tell someone what happened at Sentinel Rock Lighthouse, because I can't keep carrying this alone. The posting was supposed to be easy money. 6 months of solitude, sure, but the pay was good, and I'd done isolated duty before. The lighthouse sits on a chunk of granite about 40 miles off the Alaska coast. Nothing but rock, the keeper's quarters, and that massive Fresnel lens spinning its warning into the shipping lanes. They told me the last keeper had retired early for health reasons. They didn't mention he'd smashed every mirror in the place before he left. The first 2 months were exactly what I expected. Routine maintenance, weather logs, the hypnotic rotation of the lens every 15 seconds. I'd see maybe 1 or 2 fishing vessels a week passing through, their running lights tiny against all that black water. The isolation didn't bother me. I actually liked it. Then the malfunction started. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I first noticed. A long liner was making its way south, maybe 3 miles out, when the lens mechanism just seized up. Complete stop. 30 seconds of absolute stillness while I frantically checked the motor housing, expecting to find a stripped gear or failed bearing. Then it just started again, smooth as ever, like nothing had happened. I logged it as a transient fault, wrote it off. 3 days later, another vessel, another 30-second freeze timed perfectly to their passage. Then again and again. Every single boat that came through my sector triggered the same response. 30 seconds of dead silence from machinery that had run continuously since 1947. Look, I'm a practical person. I know machines, and machines don't develop preferences. They don't wait for specific conditions to fail. But that lens was reacting to those ships like it recognized them. The 5th time it happened, I decided to open the mechanism housing. The Fresnel lens sits in a mercury float bath, rotating on precision bearings that haven't needed adjustment in decades. I wasn't expecting to find anything. Maybe some debris had worked its way into the gears, something that shifted position at specific intervals. I removed the access panel and shined my light into the mechanism. That's when I saw the doll. It was wedged between 2 gear teeth, a tiny carved figure maybe an inch tall, impossibly detailed. Driftwood, I think, or something similar. But what made my hands start shaking was what it was wearing. A miniature fishing vest, painted in precise stripes of red and yellow, the exact colors of the long liner that had passed 3 days ago. I pulled it out with tweezers. The wood was smooth, worn, like someone had handled it constantly while carving. The face was blank, thank God, but the clothing was so accurate I could make out individual buttons. Tiny rope coiled at its waist, even the boots matched. I stood there holding this thing, trying to make sense of it. The mechanism housing was sealed. I checked it myself a dozen times. There was no way someone could have placed this without me knowing. No way someone could have known which specific ship would pass, what they'd be wearing, what colors they flew. I threw the doll into the ocean, watched it vanish in the chop, told myself it was some weird prank from the previous keeper, something he'd left behind before his breakdown. 2 days later, the lens froze again. A crabber, this time distinctive green hull. I didn't want to open the mechanism, I really didn't. But I'm responsible for that light. Vessels depend on it for navigation. So I went back in with my tools and my flashlight. Another doll, same size, same blank face, wearing a tiny green slicker that matched the crabber's deck crew. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, the details. Whoever carved these wasn't guessing. They knew. They'd seen these specific people, these specific vessels, close enough to capture details you wouldn't notice from shore. The texture of the fabric, the way a collar folded. One doll had a miniature belt buckle with a logo I could barely make out with my magnifying glass, but I'd seen that same buckle on a deckhand's photos posted to a fishing forum, bragging about a good catch. Someone was watching these ships, studying them, carving perfect little replicas and somehow placing them inside a sealed mechanism on an island I hadn't left in 3 months. I started documenting everything. Photos, measurements, detailed logs. I locked each doll in a toolbox after I found it, thinking maybe I could show someone, prove this was happening. But the next morning the toolbox would be empty, just gone, like they'd never existed. The dolls kept coming. Every ship, every malfunction, every time I opened that mechanism, another one. The carvings were getting more elaborate, more personal. A figure wearing a wedding ring. Another with a specific tattoo on its arm that matched a sailor I'd only glimpsed through binoculars. Details no one should be able to see from this distance, let alone replicate in wood the size of my thumb. I stopped sleeping much. Started watching the rocks at night, trying to catch whoever was doing this. The island is small, 200 feet across at its widest point. There's nowhere to hide. No boats ever approached. No helicopter sounds. Nothing. But someone was here. Someone was watching those ships, watching me, placing these things with surgical precision. Last week I found one that wasn't based on a passing vessel. The lens had frozen during a rare clear night, no ships in sight. I opened the mechanism already knowing I'd find something, and there it was. This one wore a Coast Guard uniform, my uniform from my years of service. It had tiny medals on the chest, the exact medals I'd earned, in the exact order I'd worn them. There was even a little name tag, too small to read, but positioned exactly right. I'm looking at it now. It's sitting on my desk, because when I tried to throw it in the ocean, I found it back in my quarters an hour later. Right here, next to my logbook. I've got 2 months left on this posting. I've radioed for early relief 3 times. They keep telling me weather conditions won't permit a pickup for weeks. I don't think that's true. I think they're waiting for something. The lens froze again this morning. No ships anywhere near. I haven't opened the mechanism yet. I can hear something moving inside the housing. A soft clicking like wood on metal. Like something walking. I'm a retired mechanic, spent 40 years under hoods and inside transmissions, and I don't scare easy. But I haven't been back to that lake since February, and I don't plan to go back. I've been ice fishing the same spot for 15 winters now, a small lake about 3 miles from my property. Nothing special, just quiet. My wife died 6 years ago, and the winter months get long. The shack's nothing fancy, just plywood walls and a propane heater. But it's mine. I usually go out for a week at a time, drill a hole, drop a line, and let the silence settle in. It's meditative, I guess you'd call it. Most days I don't even care if I catch anything. This was mid-February, the coldest stretch we'd had in years. I'd been out there 4 days when I first heard it. I was sitting on my stool, lying in the water, reading a paperback western I'd read twice before. The sound was faint at first, a rhythmic metallic clinking, like someone tapping a wrench against a pipe. Clink, pause, clink, pause, clink. I thought maybe it was the heater settling, or ice expanding somewhere under the shack. But the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. I set the book down and listened. It was coming from below, somewhere deep under the ice. Not from the hole I'd drilled, but from beneath the entire floor of the shack. Clink, pause, clink. I know what you're thinking. Water does strange things under ice, especially thick ice. Currents shift, pressure builds, air pockets make noise. I thought the same thing. But this wasn't random. It had a rhythm. Almost like Morse code, but not quite. Just steady, purposeful tapping. I went back to my book, tried to ignore it. But once you notice a sound like that, you can't unhear it. It went on for maybe 20 minutes, then stopped. Completely. No fade out, no gradual silence. Just gone. That night I couldn't sleep. The shack was quiet except for the wind outside and the occasional crack of ice settling. But I kept waiting for that sound to come back. Around 2 in the morning it did. Same rhythm. Same metallic quality. Clink, pause, clink. This time it lasted maybe 10 minutes, then stopped again. The next day I told myself I was being ridiculous. I'm 62 years old, not some kid getting spooked by the dark, but I couldn't let it go. I had an old waterproof microphone in my truck. I'd used it years back to check for engine noise in weird places. I figured I'd drop it down the fishing hole, see if I could get a better sense of where the sound was coming from. I drilled a second hole about 20 feet from the shack, away from where my line was. The ice was nearly 18 inches thick. Took me a good 40 minutes to get through. When I finally broke into the water below, I could see the dark current moving slow and sluggish under the ice. I tied the microphone to a length of paracord and lowered it down, maybe 30 feet. Then I went back to the shack and waited. The clinking started again around noon. I grabbed the receiver and put the headphones on. The sound came through immediately, much louder than I expected. It was definitely metallic, but not hollow. It had weight to it, like something heavy being struck against something solid. And it was deep. Maybe 60, 70 feet down. Then it stopped. I sat there with the headphones on, waiting for it to start again. 5 seconds, 10, 20, and then I heard something else, shuffling. Not like boots on gravel, more like something heavy being dragged across a hard surface, slow and measured. And it was moving. I could hear it growing fainter to the left, then louder to the right, like it was circling or searching. My hands started shaking. I don't know why, but the sound of that shuffling made my stomach drop in a way the clinking never did. Because the clinking could have been anything. A piece of debris, some structural quirk of the lake bed. But this was movement, purposeful movement. And then it stopped. Right below the shack, right below my fishing hole. I could hear it through the headphones, but I could also feel it. A faint vibration through the ice, like something large settling into place directly beneath me. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, staring at the dark circle of water in front of me. The line in my hole started moving, not like a fish, like something was pulling on it from below, slow and steady. The line went taut, then slackened, then taut again. I watched it slide through the water back and forth like something was testing the weight. I yanked the headphones off and grabbed the line. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. But the second my hands touched it, the pulling stopped. The line went completely slack. I hauled it up as fast as I could, hand over hand, expecting to see my hook bent or the bait gone. But the hook was bare, clean. No bait, no damage, like it had been plucked off. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what I just felt. And then I heard the shuffling again. No headphones this time, just the sound coming up through the ice, muffled but unmistakable. It was moving again, circling below the shack in slow, deliberate passes. I grabbed my coat and got out of there. I didn't pack up, didn't pull the microphone from the second hole, just walked straight back to my truck and drove home. I told myself I'd go back the next day, pack up my gear, maybe laugh about it once I'd had some sleep, but I didn't go back the next day or the day after that. 3 weeks later, I finally drove out there to get my shack. I don't know what I expected to find. Part of me thought maybe the whole thing had been some kind of exhaustion-induced paranoia, but when I got to the lake, the shack was gone. Not destroyed, not collapsed, gone. The ice where it had been was smooth and clear, like it had never been there at all. No drag marks, no debris. The 2 holes I drilled were still there, frozen over with fresh ice. I walked out to the second hole and looked down. The paracord was still there, frozen into the ice, trailing down into the dark water below, but the microphone was gone. I pulled on the cord. It came up easy, no resistance. The end was frayed like it had been chewed through, or cut. I left the cord there, drove home. I've been trying to find a rational explanation for what happened, but I keep coming back to that shuffling sound and the way my line moved. I don't know what's down there, but I know it heard me. And I know it came up to see what I was. The thing I can't stop thinking about is this. The lake is only 40 feet deep.